Being powerful is a bit like being ladylike. So if you have to say you are, you probably ain't. So I think I like America most of all on the days when people are not going around shouting, USA, USA, we're number one, we're the greatest. I prefer the days when they don't do that, when they're probably most to be admired.
What is it that makes us boast about our greatness and belittle others? What is it that keeps us from ascending beyond the immediate? I cannot help but wonder what Hitchens would say today. It is a thought that somewhat haunts me as I stumble through communicating a similar belief of many before me, that we are brothers and sisters of the human race, with core values shared among us, which are hidden in the labels and divisions we create.
And if you understand freedom, it's based on tolerance and nonviolence. So if it's tolerance, it should be bringing all kinds of people together, and that's following our Constitution. We shouldn't be fighting among ourselves, because we shouldn't be fighting in Washington. If we all take the same oath of office, where does the fight come from? Somebody is messing up somewhere.
Libertarians proclaim reducing government interference because all Americans should be free to live their lives and pursue their interests as they see fit, as long as they do no harm to another. That peaceful, honest people should decide for themselves how to live their lives without fear of criminal penalties, and that the government's responsibility, if any, should be protecting its citizens from force and fraud.
The ruling class has always taught and trained you to believe it to be your patriotic duty to go to war and to have yourself slaughtered at their command.
The socialist soapbox calls for a classless society with communal ownership and perspective that is driven to enhance freedom, justice, and solidarity towards a goal of peace. Peace, of course, includes police abolishment, which I must say is highly unlikely to ever be a reality, but it is the only ethical goal.
Right? Forget about effectiveness or not effectiveness. You don't get to confiscate my money just because you and your friends vote to take it.
The deliberate pragmatism of conservative thought espouses the value of moral order and building off the best of the past with long-term goals that are achieved mainly through community and family with an ideally restrained and fiscally prudent government.
People are born to be free, and that their basic instinct is the desire to free themselves from coercion, authority, and oppression.
The ideal liberal is said to believe in that natural goodness of human beings and the intrinsic value of individual liberty, that to have an honorable society, we must have moral equality across sex, race, birth origin, religion, gender, class, wealth, etc., which is achieved through nonviolent modifications of institutions.
With certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
America, America, America. Cannot help but believe we have steered ourselves quite off course. We are now reading the Introduction to the Author chapter of Crimes and Punishments. Well, more accurately, Roberto Alejandro is about to read what he wrote because he is the scribe of the Introduction to the Author. It seems at least a little disingenuous for me to introduce myself to you, and definitely hypocritical for someone who proclaims that an accurate perception of oneself is unlikely to come from the narrative in one's own mind. Essentially, I am quite sure that when a dog is peeing on the carpet, it makes perfect sense to him, so we probably should not seek an opinion from Fido on the pros and cons of pissing on carpets. Admittedly, I am unsure the wisdom of comparing my thoughts to the foils of our beloved canines, but I must confess an understanding that my words can hit just like that feeling of lukewarm liquid soaking through your sock in the middle of the night. It seems most appropriate to point out the work of Roberto in this episode. Roberto will speak to you as an unassuming and unthreatening friend, which he is, but his kindness masks an intelligence and accomplishments. Often when I feel lost intellectually, I will turn to Roberto. As an educated Puerto Rican American, his balance of privilege, oppression, education, and journalism formulates a valuable perspective. He is another one of those often underappreciated influencers of others who has been working at bridging the divides of our socially constructed categories and narrative versus truth. Learn from Roberto and his work at stayup.news. Right after we go over a little more about what crimes and punishments in the 21st century essays are, we will get to the introduction to the author. Like most cops, the emotions felt when pinning the badge on my uniform for the first time was a source of immense pride, but also a shocking reality to the complication of performing a duty under the weight of such power and responsibility. The callousness of veterans cops and the braggadocious masculinity of the streets are immature expressions of the generations of trauma enacted on our brothers and sisters from a system oppressing us all. My internal fights with policing, whistleblowing, scholarly endeavors, reform efforts, and politics have failed in exhausting fashion.
And what I'm trying to say is that we are looking at people who are doing nothing new, and if we focus on the actions, then we can fix the things for next time, because when you focus on people, we end up thinking we can chop the head off, they put a new person in, something will change. But if we don't focus on the methodologies and the institutions, then we will be totally missing
somebody, put them in a prison cell, do the paperwork, go back out, and do it again. So what we really need is to change the incentives and disincentives so that no matter what the role, we're still going towards that objective that actually serves you.
More occupation, more vehicles, if your answer continues to be violent, because we have to understand that everything about policing is inherently violent. I have come in there with authority and told you what you will do.
I believe one of the reasons behind my struggles is that I had not laid out a consistent and intertwined philosophy of what in the hell I was trying to say. For the philosophical foundations of crime and punishment to be ushered into the 21st century, a reimagination of our institutions is necessary. Building off the famous works of Cesare Beccaria, I construct those pathways to the Enlightenment period of justice. Free will, sanctuary cities, gun control, eyewitness testimony, incarceration, and more must all work together for a prosperous society. Learning these lessons has been a brutal journey for me, and is unlikely to be an easy one for you, but it is one that we owe to the future, to make a safer world for our children to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century by yours truly, Michael Wood, is most conveniently ordered from the evil empire Amazon, because we are in that 21st century after all. For the enhanced and expanded audiobook, check out Audible. In the meantime, the philosophical half of Crime and Punishments, all 40-some chapters and then some, is being presented as a free podcast from iMemberMedia at iMemberMedia.com and will be available on all major platforms and direct from the publisher. Pause the video or see the links in the notes and prepare for the challenge and adventure of self-critical thought.
Introduction to the author. It can be said that most Americans have a tenuous relationship to our criminal laws. Few of us have a sense of just how many criminal statutes can be brought to bear on our lives, an excuse to limit our freedom and movement should a representative of the state decide it is our turn to fall under the thumb of enforcement. Police management scholar Michael Wood was previously one of those state representatives, having served 11 years as an officer, narcotics detective, and sergeant in the Baltimore Police Department. During that period, Wood came to see how racism was entrenched in the enforcement of law, rendering rules that ostensibly served to keep society safe an arbitrary exercise of power and structural prejudice. Additionally, he came to see just how many laws granted him leave to exercise that power on behalf of prejudice, providing him a ready arsenal of charges he could level at citizens any time his arrest numbers were too low for comfort. Arrests, after all, being the principal metric by which police officer performance and effectiveness are judged. For a number of years now, Wood has been advocating for an approach to police organization that would allow citizens greater say in the goals and desired outcomes of policing, leaving police professionals to implement those goals. His model, known as civilian-led policing, establishes a citizen board weighted in favor of those communities that receive the greatest amount of enforcement action in order to ensure that those who are most policed have a voice in the development of goals that are ultimately about them. In Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century, Wood lays out a number of the principles that underlie his approach to police organization. Principles which generally hew closely to extant research about human psychology and reject classical assumptions about human rationality and free will. In that classical paradigm, human beings are endowed with a faculty known as reason, whether by God or by nature, and this faculty allows them to distinguish and choose between good and evil, right and wrong. But as Wood points out in the introduction to this essay, the human being operates within a matrix of social constructions, not rationally sourced conclusions, what we have classically referred to as truth. On Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century attempts to centralize this postmodern insight about humans and our approach to the problem of law. Thus, rather than think about law as a set of rules based on true rational conclusions about humanity and the world, Wood challenges us to think about law as a tool for enabling the joint construction of that system in which all humans operate, society. Put another way, law is here treated as a tool for enabling human cooperation, not protecting against violations of natural or civil right, which has often had the consequence of rendering law, and especially criminal law, a purely punitive exercise. The work takes its title and its lead from Cesare Beccaria's On Crimes and Punishment, an Enlightenment era essay that influenced the evolution of criminal law in our own American context, rejecting some aspects of Beccaria's thought while embracing others, particularly Beccaria's prescription that laws which unnecessarily limit human freedom are also tyrannical. If human beings are defined by the cooperation that is the foundation of society, then how should we think about law and how should we treat those whose actions inhibit our shared approach to society? We know punishment does not deter crime, nor does it produce greater commitment to shared social systems, but rather often makes participation in such systems even more difficult for the quote-unquote offender. Wood challenges us to let go of any social demand for punishment, recognizing that this demand undermines the goal of society itself, and instead asks us to look skeptically at our own social contract rather than reverently. If our social contract is an object of suspicion, then we ought to be more willing to alter its features as its limitations come to the fore, rather than reflexively defend aspects that hinder cooperation on the basis that they are quote-unquote right, or quote-unquote true, or worse, that we are quote-unquote right, and we know the quote-unquote truth. At the heart of Wood's civilian-led policing model rests the idea that citizen guidance of policing ensures greater flexibility with respect to our conclusions about what is just and lawful, since the persons cooperatively determining the goals and desired outcomes of policing are themselves the ones whose actions are being regulated thereby. Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century is an invitation to reorient oneself vis-a-vis the notion of law. Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century is an invitation to reorient oneself vis-a-vis the notion of law in order to think about how laws impact us as human beings, and how, therefore, they might be better harnessed in the direction of encouraging what for Wood is our most defining human feature, cooperation.
Brush up on your cultural references to The Matrix to prepare for the next episode as we explore an extremely simple concept: reality.